Last week, I said that theology starts with us, with our sense of who God is in our lives and what God is calling us to be and do. Now, there are two other sources that we need to include as we formulate our personal theology. First, as I said last week, we have our experience of God. But second, we have the Bible. And then third is the situation or the context in which we find ourselves. Last week we talked about our own experience of God. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to focus on the second of those three sources, which is the Bible. And we're going to be learning how to do critical Bible study. Now, when I say critical, I don't mean that the purpose is to criticize or tear down the Bible. Rather, by critical Bible study, I mean we are going to use critical thinking tools or strategies to help us more accurately understand what the Bible's message is for us today. And those tools and strategies are covered in the book by Doug Stewart and Gordon Fee, which that you're reading for this course, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. Now, some of you have probably done some sort of Bible study, but my guess is that this approach will be foreign to most of you. Most Bible study we do in the church or in small groups is geared toward discerning what the Bible is saying to me in my life. And while that's a valid form of Bible study, it's not critical Bible study. Critical Bible study first seeks to discern what the author of a given biblical text was trying to say to his audience in his time. As far as we know, all the biblical authors were men. So when I say his audience, I really do mean his audience. We're trying to see why the author would tell a particular story in a particular way to a particular group of people, or why he would arrange a series of sayings in specific groupings, or why he would use certain words to convey the message or tell the story that he's trying to tell. This first step is what we call exegesis. Now, only after we have understood what a text is saying in its own time can we then translate that message or that truth or that lesson into our own time. And that second part, that translating, is what we call interpretation. Now, some people will say, well, isn't it all about interpretation? I mean, you interpret the Bible one way and I do it another, and so what's the big deal? We all have our own view of things. Well, that's a great way to avoid disagreement, but that attitude really doesn't get us any closer to the truth. And for Christians, the issue is, what is truth? What is real? What is God really saying? And there's no doubt that Christians have disagreed on all sorts of things down through the ages, from whether or not priests should marry, to the nature of the church, to who should be baptized and when, to the meaning of communion. And those disagreements and different interpretations continue up today, with Christians having different perspectives on whether they ought to participate in war, on whether women ought to be in leadership, or whether gays and lesbians should be allowed to marry in the church, or whether they'd be allowed in the church at all. Interpretations can and do differ. But what are those interpretations based on? What truths that were spoken in biblical times are we trying to translate into our own time, and are we translating them accurately? If you've ever been misquoted or had someone take something you said out of context, you know how disagreeable and how disconcerting that is. And yet we do it with the Bible all the time. We take things out of context to make them say what we want them to say, rather than seeking to understand through a critical Bible study method what the Bible was saying in its own time, and then trying to translate it into our own. That's what critical Bible study helps us with, and that's what we're going to be working on for the next couple of weeks. So read Fee and Stewart's book carefully and use it as a reference. And then apply those tools to your own study of Scripture, and I think the Bible will come alive for you in ways that you've never experienced before. And here's how we're going to do it. I've given you a particular passage of Scripture to think about. And based on your reading from Fee and Stewart's books, what I want you to do is to identify the kinds of questions you might ask about that particular text to get at its authentic meaning in its own time. And I want you to do this by Wednesday, and then we'll come together online and go over this passage, and we'll walk through the process of exegesis and interpretation together using many of the questions that you will have raised. Because very often the key to effective critical Bible study is asking the right questions. And then the following week, each group is going to be given a particular passage, and together you're going to do critical Bible study on that passage. So start in your discussion groups, write out your questions, then come together on Wednesday or Thursday, and hopefully you'll begin to get an idea of how to really read the Bible for all it's worth.